Hey everyone. So in today's video, we'll be learning how to create a responsive column layout using CSS Grid. And really the beauty of this tutorial is that it's essentially only 4 lines of CSS code to get the layout working. So there will be 2 parts to this video. In the first part, we'll be creating this bare bones template, just focusing on what those 4 lines of code are, which you can honestly just see here. And making something very simple. And then if you want to stick around and do something a little bit more complex, we'll be taking that layout and applying that to the real life example. So in this case, I have this fictional page of podcast episodes, and I have these cards here. Each card represents an episode. And then if I resize it, it just kind of nicely adjusts to the screen. So to get started, all you need is a CodePen account. And if you don't have one, you can just create it for free. And just like Figma, CodePen has a cool browser line shortcut that you can use to create a new file. So you're going to just type in pen.new, and you'll have the blank CodePen ready to go. We are going to start with setting up our HTML, just with a couple of examples. So we're going to have an overall wrapper container that will contain all of our cards. So I'll just use a div and give it a class of container. And then let's close it. And here I'm going to add a bunch of cards, and I will just do the placeholder text like card 1, card 2. And I'm assigning numbers to this just so it's easier to see later on how the layout changes and where each card goes. So I have 7 cards here, and I'm going to add a little bit of styling just so it's easier to see the actual size of the element, and we'll make them look a little bit more like cards. For our styles, I'm going to give them a background color of this dark gray. So now you can see each one is like spans across the entire screen here. And then maybe another thing that we'll do is give it a height, maybe like 400 pixels. We're not going to do this in the real life example because we'll be using the content inside the card to drive the automatic height of the card. But since here we don't really have any content inside the card, we'll just give it a fixed one. Now we're going to implement our grid, and we'll be doing it on the overall container wrapper. So I'll do the container thing here. And then the first thing that we need to do is that we want to set it as display grid. Then from here, the first thing I'm going to do is give it a gap of maybe 1 rem. So now you can at least see the breaks between the cards. And then from here, we will do grid template columns. Now let's talk this over and think like, what is it that we want our grid to do for us? So the first thing is that we're using columns because this is a column layout, so more or less straightforward. But then what we want our columns to do, essentially we want our grid to fit in as many columns as possible on our screen, as long as those columns meet a certain minimum width. And what that minimum width should be is probably something that looks good on most mobile phones. So the average width for the phone is around 375 pixels. So I think if we do like 240, that should look fine, and we'll guarantee that it will look good on phones and that we don't need to write an extra media query. That's the first part. And then the second part that we need to think about is that, yes, we have 7 cards here, and we know that for a fact. But if we're loading some dynamic number of cards and we don't know what the exact amount is going to be, we need to design for that. So essentially, we just want our grid layout to keep on repeating itself for as long as there are cards. Now let's put all of this information into one line of CSS. So what we're going to do, we're going to repeat, and then we'll autofill our available space with all the cards. And then for each card, we want to set a minimum and a maximum value for that card width. So I think I said like around 14 rems for the minimum width. That should be fine for mobile phones, so we don't need to add an extra media query. And then for the maximum value, we'll just do 1 frame, which just means like just take the available remaining space. To translate what this means, obviously the size of your screen is not always going to be neatly divisible by 14 rems. And if that's not the case, and most often it's not going to be the case, what we want to do, we don't want these cards to just sit at 14 rems. we just want to take the remaining space and divide it equally between the cards that are on the screen. We can actually quickly demonstrate what it would look like if we just set our cards at 14 rems. So I remove the min-max function, and now as you can see, there is this extra space here. And then all the cards are always 14 rems. Here at the moment, there's not enough space for this third card here. We just keep this two, and then we end up with this blank space. So let's go back to our max, and we'll do one frame. And now we're back to our correct layout. This was the end of part 1. In the second part, we'll be applying this layout to a real-life example. And of course, I have to start with a short backstory. So I'm a huge fan of the Tim Ferriss show, but I've always found it difficult to go and search for an episode just to explore what's out there. Currently, when I go on the website, it's just a list of all the episodes, a lot of text. So my thought is that this would be a great candidate for a grid layout, which we'll do here. This would allow us to have more episodes per available screen size, and then we can also insert some pictures and just make it easier on the eyes. So this is our second part. Just like we did with the template part, all I'm gonna do is create a new pen. And just as a side note, you can either follow me word for word and do this specific example here, or you can just do something of your own. And if you are doing this specific example, I did get all the text and all the image sources from the actual website. So if you go inside each individual episode's page, you will find the images here. We're going to start by setting up our HTML. So the first thing I'm going to do is the overall heading for our page, which is going to say all episodes. And then from here, we're going to have an unordered list. And that's going to be our episodes. And then let's give this a class of episodes. And then our single one is going to be episode. And first we'll start by building out one episode, and then we'll just copy it over for the remaining ones. Each card of our episode is going to have an episode summary and then the episode platforms. So let's do the summary here. And then our next one, actually, it's going to be also an unordered list. It's going to be episode platforms. Let's close this. And then inside our summary, we're going to have just, episode info up at the top. And that's going to be, because it's going to be our episode number. And then we'll have a date. Under the info, we're going to have an image. So we'll have a source, we'll have an alt text. And then we'll have an H2 tag. So our second level heading, which is going to be like the name of the episode or the guest name. And then I think this one. And then below we'll have a description. Just grab this part. And then for our platforms, we're going to have Apple Podcasts. Then we'll have an item for Spotify. And then we'll have an item for Overcast. Now that we have some of our HTML in place, we can set up some of the styles. And the first thing I'm going to do is the typefaces. So there is this very clean and beautiful website called Funshare, and they provide free typefaces that you can use. And one thing that I really like here is font pairings. So 2 different typefaces together, one for headings, one for the main text. So I picked one of these pairs, this one. To get this, all you need to do is do the add styles, and then you'll have them here. You can also add extra font widths if you want. Like for this one, it came with bold, but I also added the medium one. And then to use, you'll just need to go through the agreement for their license. And then what you're going to do is copy this part here. And we're going to return to our pen, go to settings, go to HTML. And inside this head section, you're just going to insert this link. And now you can use this as your font family. So let's say I want our default to be the asphalt one. So I'm just going to do asphalt sans serif. And now you can see the typeface changed. The next thing we're going to do is add some variables for colors. So actually, when I was playing around with designs for this tutorial, I did make a very messy Figma file, and I used colors from one of the prior color tutorials. So now I'm going to use a plugin to quickly generate variables based on these colors. The first thing I'm going to do is select all of my colors here. Then I'm going to go to the plugin section. And this plugin, I have it in my recents, but it's called Bar Colors. So if you search for it, they're just going to come up. And I'm going to run it. And here it will ask me if I want local styles or selection. Let's just do selection, even though it would probably be the same thing in this case. And then the color format, I'll keep it as hex. And then we'll just do the copy to clipboard. And what I can do now is return to the file, add the root tag here, and paste the colors. And we can also format this so it looks nicely. Now we can do some more styling work inside our actual pen. So the first thing I'm going to do is give a default color for the text as gray 900, so it's not pure harsh black. And then the next thing we're going to do is for our paragraph tags, we will do margin 0. And then for our unordered list, we're going to do list style none. And then we'll also do margin 0 and padding 0. And maybe for now, for our H1, we also don't want to have any margins. I'll do H2 here as well. And now I'm going to go to the podcast page here and just grab a source for the image. And we'll paste it inside here. And for the alt text, we can say like Tim Ferriss portrait. Think illustration by 99 Designs. And now let's give our overall card a border so that we know for a fact where the borders of it are. So I'm going to go and do I think that we'll call it episode, and we'll do border 1 pixel, solid, and we'll do gray 400. So now we can clearly see the edges of the card. Another thing we're going to do is adjust our image here. Now you can see it spills outside the edges of the card because it's just a fixed size. So I'm going to do the image tag here, and the width, we just want to set it to be 100%. And now it's contained inside the card. What we can actually do now is set up our grid layout. Yes, we only have one card, but if you remember, we are not setting any like fixed widths on the cards themselves. It's all driven from our overall layout wrapper. So what I'm going to do is do our list of episodes. And let's say, and we'll do display grid. And then we'll do our grid template columns. And we'll do repeat, autofill. And here's our card. Let's pause here and talk about one thing. Right now, if I resize the screen, you can see that the width of the card still kind of floats in between 14 rems and then some max 1 frame width, but it doesn't stretch out across the entire page. Why does it happen? And the reason for this is this autofill setting here. So even though we only have one card on the screen, there is still more than enough space for several cards that are at least 14 rem wide. And what this autofill word tells the grid to do, it just says, okay, well, even if there are no cards, but there is enough space, still fill that space with the blank columns, because we don't want one card to get too big. So one thing that we can do to see this visually is go inside our DevTools here. And I'm going to click on this little tiny grid thing here. And you can see that, again, we don't have a card here, but the space for it is preserved. And now let's say we delete this autofill word and replace it with autofit. So what's going to happen? Now the grid is just going to autofit the only card that we have on all the available space, and we end up with something big like this. There is definitely a use case for autofit, but not in this instance here. So we're going to switch it back to autofill. Let's take a short break from the grid stuff and we'll do some more styling with the card. So I'm gonna go ahead and let's start with the episode info. We're going to set it to display as flex and justify content space between. And then for the overall episode, we will do padding of 25 rem. And then we also want it to be display flex and direction column. Then for our paragraph, let's adjust the font family to sentient. And we'll also style our links. We'll give them a color of blue 800. Actually, maybe I will switch these two to spans. Also now for headings, maybe we'll just keep the default margin for the H1 tag. And then for the H2, we can do something like this. And then we'll update the margin for our paragraph to maybe, for our image, we want it to always be a square, so we'll give it an aspect ratio of 1. And then we'll do an object width cover so it doesn't stretch out. Lastly, for the episode summary, we're also going to display it as flex. Flex direction as column, and then we'll give it a gap of half rem. So it's just this part here. And then the last part that we have to do is the platforms. So one thing that I'm gonna do is give a class of platform link. And now we can just target this specific ones. What we're going to do is not going to have a text decoration, and we're going to do the color just gray 700. And then we're going to add our icons, and I'm going to get this from the Figma file. And actually, if you just search for like Apple Podcast SVG icon, usually it's very easy to find one. And actually, I think this one I just got from here. So I'm going to copy HSSVG. And this is definitely a bit messy because I'm not storing SVG elsewhere. I'm just pasting it directly in here. So what you can do if you're doing this in the actual code editor, you can create a separate file for the SVG and store it there and just reference it in your HTML file. And one thing I'm going to do here is replace this fill from this hex gray color. I'm going to just say current color. So this way, if we ever want to update the color to something else, we don't need to worry about updating that for our SVG as well. We'll just do it in one place, wherever we set the color that references this element. So here's our icon. And now I'm going to grab the two other icons for the Spotify and Overcast. So I got my icons here, and I replaced the fills for all of them with current color instead of the default gray color. And actually one thing that you can do to make this easier on yourself is first just press format so it's tidier. And then you're also able to just collapse your SVGs so that they don't take as much space. Now that we have our icons, we can finish the platform links. So first I'm going to set them display as flex, and I will align the items to center. And then we could have maybe a half rem gap. And then on the overall link, we'll set the padding for 1 rem vertically and half rem horizontally. And then the last thing that I want to do is add the tab border of 1 pixel, solid 400. And then on the overall list, we're going to add a margin tab for spacing. And lastly, for the platform link, we want to add the background color when you hover over it. So it's just an additional indicator to the default pointer cursor. Now let's add one more card to our layout so that we get a better sense of what it looks like with multiple cards. So I'm going to just collapse this one and I will paste it here. Okay, so I replaced the content with the Dita Fontes episode, and there are two things that we notice here right away. The first is that the cards are touching because we didn't add the gap to our grid. So I'm going to return to our list of episodes and we'll give this a gap of 1 rem. Now we have a gap. And another thing you can see is that because this text is so short compared to this one, the card still stretches out to match the longest card in the row. And that's fine, but ideally we want our platforms to always be here at the bottom. So what I'm going to do is go to our episode, and here we set it to flex earlier. And now it's going to help us because what we're going to do is we'll do justify content space between. So because we only have 2 elements inside our card, we have the summary and the platforms. It's going to place the summary at the top and platforms at the bottom. And the only gap that we have is the space in between these 2 elements. Now I'm going to add maybe 5 more cards just so that we get a bigger list. And then we'll take a look at the overall picture and see whether there are any adjustments or cleanups that we can do. Okay, so I added a few more episodes. And now what we can do is go inside the full page view. And here we just get a better sense of what our page would look like as a whole. So maybe a couple of things I can do. And actually the first one I already did off camera. I did increase the minimum width to 15 rems instead of 14. 14 just felt a little too narrow. And then another thing that I can do is on the overall body, which is everything that we have in here, everything that's inside this HTML section, we're going to give a margin of maybe 2 rems. So it's not too close to the page. And then for our paragraphs here, we'll add a margin right of 1 rem. So place this here. And we will also do a line height of 1.4. Oh, and this is a small thing, but when I first did the design, I was just going all the most recent episodes. And then I was like, I'm actually just going to do some of my favorite ones. There are more, but I just chose the first 7 that came to mind. So I'll rename this to Masha's favorite TFS episodes. I think that's more accurate of what we see here. And now we'll go and look at it in the full page view again. And as you can see, when we resize, the cards never get too wide or too narrow, and we didn't need to use any media queries to get this working. So I think that's it for this tutorial. It was definitely a lot. Hope you learned new stuff. And of course, I'll link all the code pens, all the resources that I mentioned in this tutorial. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. All right, last thing. So as I was looking at this card, I was like, well, Cal Newport doesn't really look like Cal Newport. And of course, because I messed this up and I got the wrong picture. So I'm going to update it right here. Just gonna go grab this image and make sure it's correct. Sorry, Cal. Here we go. Now we're good.